John F. Kennedy Library President's Office Files. Presidential Recordings Collection. Tape number 63. There are no excisions. For additional information, please see recording log number 63.
Captain, I did it over a copy that you can. Look at the page number on it.
Supposedly, I wonder, during life, too, what supposedly is the dispute?
Well, life would like to make a dispute,
But I understand it is just a question of whether we need $400 million more to maintain our present schedule. Is that correct?
Well, it's very hard to say what our present schedule is. I think the easiest way to understand what has happened is to say that we started out, after you made the decision in May, to come forward with a driving program. We used the best information we had, and we settled on late 67 or early 68 as the landing date. We wanted to have some leeway within the decade. Now, this was a target date. We recognized we might have some slippage. We had some financial estimates at that time which have proved to be too small. The increased cost estimated by the contractors is partly because each of them has added to the cost that he submitted on his contract proposals to us. And second, we have added requirements to each of these vehicles. Now, the combination of the increased cost now estimated by the contractors, plus our own increased knowledge as a result of about a year's work, has led us first to confirm the fact that the late 67 or 68 date is a good date for us to have as our target date. Second, that to accomplish that now and to run the kind of program that you want run, we have to go through a real strong, vigorous management period to shake down these things. Obviously, you can make an Apollo that would include a tremendous number of things that would cost a lot of money and probably are not necessary. On the other hand, you could make one that was too marginal and that we would not want to entrust this mission to. We have to find the place in between as we go along with these projects.
Tell me about it. When you say the contractors add to the cost, how do they get these contractors? Is it by bidding?
Yes, what they do is they come in with a proposal, and we
know how much it's going to cost. Then what do? Go and add cost? Yesterday you were talking about what the Titan is going up to. What do these contractors
well, the case
add to
of
the
the
cost?
Titan, those were internal estimates, not contractor estimates that went up. Yeah, here's what happens. We make an estimate within the agency as to what the proposition ought to cost in terms of our own judgment of what we want to buy. We ask for proposals from the contractors. We evaluate those proposals, and they submit an estimated cost on the basis of their own proposal. Now, we then select a contractor for negotiation. In the process of negotiation, we both together more clearly define exactly what apparatus is to be purchased and make a more accurate estimate of the cost.
And not fixed price contracts.
No, sir, they are not fixed price contracts. But the process of defining the thing more accurately, usually in this kind of business, adds to the cost. And the contractor himself, of course, looks much more carefully when he has been selected. He's not now proposing. Obviously, in his proposal, he's going to put his best foot forward.
That's right. But you ought to let them get. I know with the Defense Department that all that for years, where these fellows come in lower and then begin to add them. What profit do we figure in justifying these additional costs? What profit are we allowing them?
Well, we are pursuing two or three different policies. One of them is to try to enforce, in some cases, the fact where they get no profit from the increased cost. In other cases, where it's clearly a matter that we have added to the contract ourselves to accomplish the mission, it's only fair and right that we should allow them their fee on this work. But we're doing a great deal of work, Mr. President, in looking at this whole contracting process. But the point that I want to make and leave clearly in your mind is that this process of determining what you're actually going to use to land on the moon and exactly what specific guidance equipment goes in it is a continuing process that's a partnership arrangement between the contractor and the government. There's no other way anybody's figured out to do it. And we will be making changes in it as we go along. The tendency for the contractor is to do a more expensive job. And it's a very hard management job to hold this in line. And the kind of crash program that would be required if we tried to push this thing forward 6 months and do it in early 67 instead of late 67, I think would make us vulnerable to a good many pressures along this line we wouldn't have. I think we'll have a more orderly, better managed program. We'll define these projects and do a much better job of management of the program under the schedule of late 67.
Now, let me just ask a couple of questions. On this McDonald, supposedly strict limits been set against overtime work, are they talking about work on the Phantom, or have there been any cutbacks in overtime work on Mercury and Gemini at McDonald? They have there.
Yes, sir. There has been.
They weren't doing much overtime work anyway, though, were they?
Well, they were doing an average of 15%, and now they're down around 3%.
Let me explain it, because this is not just what you'd call a normal kind of a cutback on account of money. In this project, the tendency of the technical people is to do everything looking forward to the lunar landing as soon as possible in order to learn the most from it, so that you've got more time to learn from Gemini. Now, actually, we could do the Gemini flights, maybe, as you will see from this chart, 4 months earlier than we have on our present schedule. On the other hand, we've looked very carefully with the Bureau of the Budget at the possibility of delaying it for a longer period to defer the expenditures. What we've done is come with a program in that top line that we believe gives us the information at a time it would be most useful to us and is the most reasonable schedule considering all factors. Now, McDonald has phased out its engineering on the Phantom. And while they've got a lot of production work to do on the Phantom, they've got engineers, a large number of engineers they'd like to put to work. So they say, why don't we speed up here? We've got resources. They also have in mind that if they could speed this up and make the flights, they might sell some of these vehicles to the Air Force. They have every reason for wanting to speed it up on our money. We feel in the prudent management of our money, what we have is the program that's best fitted for us. So we have, now, I went out to McDonald 10 days ago myself, sat down with McDonald and all 15 of his people. He was then saying, I want to spend $25 million a month on this program. I said, $16 million a month is all you can spend, and we're going to judge you on the cost of this project as well as the technical efficiency. So there's that difference between $25 million he'd like to spend and $16 million we've allocated.
Well, now the Gemini is split how much?
Well, the first unmanned.
You can't. This word slip is a wrong word.
In other words,
Yeah.
kind of when was it before?
The first unmanned was this open circle. First unmanned shot.
That was what?
Oh, it's next
October
year.
of 63. That's unmanned what? 2 men around the world, how many times?
This is August of 63. Unmanned suborbital flight. Not orbital at all. To check re-entry of the heat shield and so forth. That's the circle. And that's now here in December, right? Now, the first manned one, which would be orbital, and which would be with the 2 men, was here in October of 63, and now here in February of 64.
That would be 2 men around the world, how many times?
Well, we haven't really decided how many times. The thought right now is 3 to 6, but we would have a capacity and capability of going for a long time, a week, in fact. 2 weeks is what we're building into basic design.
When do you expect to do 2 weeks?
Well, these flights here, if we look at without the supplemental, these flights are flights that would be 2-week flights, and I would suspect this one, for instance, would be 2 weeks, and these. Actually, this would be 1 week. We got 2 weeks capacity, but we really expect to have 100% redundancy and really fly 1 week duration.
2 men, 1 week.
2 men, 1 week.
The
Yeah.
summer of 64.
Summer of 64.
get that thing everything moved ahead a third of the year. How does that later affect your
Well, I'll give you the next chart for the lunar landing and show you the effect on that. The effect that this would have is somewhat hard to determine, because if everything went the way we anticipated in the design of our Apollo, probably have very little effect on the Apollo. But if we found by these one-week missions, you see, things that we don't now think are going to happen, such as, well, adverse effects from zero gravity, or anything like this, it might affect the design of the Apollo. Everything going well, I would say that, other than given its experience, it wouldn't particularly affect this schedule, which is affected in itself, however, because of the need for funds. And that schedule, if I can go on to that one, shows, once again, this schedule, which is without the supplemental funds. And it shows the first manned flight February of '65 in the Apollo.
Around the Earth.
Around the Earth oval, right.
That will be, what will that be? That's just with it, that will be
That'll be the Apollo vehicle. The Apollo command module, and the Apollo service module, 3-man.
And around the world as long as you more or less.
Yes, you could certainly go up to a week if you wanted to. The two will have 2 weeks capacity. Now, with the supplemental funding, our scheduled dates would have shown that it was here in December of '64 for the first manned flight, instead of here. In February of '65. First lunar landing, we can go over to that, which would use a larger vehicle, would move from May of '67 by our estimates to October of '67.
Now, to move it to May of '67 instead of October, how much would we estimate you'd have to spend in addition between now and then? How much this year and how much?
440 million, roughly, for 63, isn't it?
Yes, 427, something like that. So 400 plus million for '67. And in both of these schedules, it's estimated that the funding level for the following years would be just the same. In other words, both of these have an estimate between $3.5 and $4 billion for each of the succeeding
You
years.
used the wrong year. It's 427 million for 1963 as a supplemental, and it assumes the $6.2 billion for 1964.
Of which 4.6 is for the man lunar landing.
Can you tell us what the breakdown between Apollo and Gemini is in that 420? Because I gather you say Gemini may not be important in Apollo.
Gemini is about 80 million of the foreign.
So it doesn't make a big difference.
Well, now, in other words, the question is, can you put it simply to say that with the $440 million, we are taking out, we're not assuring, but we're taking out insurance, that we will not have a 6-month slip? Is that the...
Yeah, I would say that you were taking out some insurance against the slip, provided you could obligate the money now. But the problem that we face is that even if you gave the director of the budget the authority to waive his normal allocation rules, and we obligated this fund, and then we come into next year and don't get the money, we've got a terrific dislocation of a massive effort that involves many people all over the United States.
There's also a question whether you really could make a national security finding on this.
What do you mean? What to tell you
The
that?
Added Efficiency Act is very strict in its...
So I think what you'd have to do is get the key members of Congress involved. If you were going to do it, we'd have to first make up our mind and get them here.
Yeah.
Find out what they want to do.
But the problem that we would face would be one of judgment of what would really happen if we, say, lost $100 million out of that deficiency. Suppose Congress didn't give us all of it. And we'd have to be going through the Congress twice next year at a time when we are trying to get these contractors and everybody else to tighten up and to recognize cost. And
But Jim, you would say that you agree with the argument that for $440 million you save 6 months?
I don't say you'd save 6 months. When it comes to Apollo, I doubt very much if it would expedite the landing. This is my personal opinion. I think that you would be shoving the work into the first part of the period, and you would learn more from it. You'd have some insurance of making the landing in late '67 or '68 that you didn't otherwise have. But I think also the cranking up of an effort that involves thousands and thousands of people over here running on the basis over 5 years with assurance all the way along the line of the kind of decisions you're going to make, and not going up and down and having a lot of confusion about it, might also have a real effect on when we make the landing and the success we have in it.
So is your view that with the $440 million, your judgment is you won't really save any time? Is that correct?
In the lunar landing, I doubt very much if we save much time. You can schedule it, you can go through the PERT system. Bob Siemens will say, yes, we will very likely save from 4 to 6 months, but from a general overall look at how these big programs run, I doubt if we'd save very much time. Now, Bob, I think you want to say your own view, because you're the operating head of this operation.
I think I essentially agree with you, Jim, that you can schedule 6 months earlier, but you have to understand what these dates really are. These are dates for the internal management of the projects. They have to be dates that people believe are realistic. I mean, you have to have a fighting chance to achieve these dates, but they're by no means dates that you can absolutely guarantee at this time, because this is a development program, and you are learning as you go along. And if you crank up too much of a crash program and you start running into trouble, it can take more time to unsort the difficulty than if it is a better paced program.
That's a better way to state what I was trying to state. I think we can do in an orderly way what we've scheduled. I think the other will provide quite a series of crises in the course of it, which we'll settle, but which will, in a sense, put your attention on the crisis at the moment, rather than on a 5-year program run in a way that gets us the most for our money and makes the best record of what you can do in this kind of big technological effort.
I think one way of looking at it is just proceed on the assumption that you do not meet any unexpected obstacles. This is an assumption which, from experience, we know is not completely accurate. In Mercury, for example, we started scheduling, as I recall, 18 or 24 months. We actually made our mission in 39 months. Why the delay? There were 2 principal factors. One was a structural problem in the thin-skinned atlas that took us 6 or 8 months to resolve. Another was a failure in a transistor and a guidance system that caused us to blow up one of these vehicles and saved the capsule all right. But these 2 experiences, which you don't foresee in your schedule, are the things that stretch it out. And this is one reason we do not like to see a public commitment that we're going to land in 67. The public commitment is we'll do it by the end of the decade. For purposes of keeping the heat and pressure on, you schedule it just as tight as you can.
Right. And if you notice, this Gemini scheduled on the other chart is about as tight a schedule as ever been put together. You see, there's one unmanned suborbital flight, and then the next flight's got 2 men in it. Now, this is quite a commitment to make.
And that is, even this one here, the top one, is 26 months from the date we initiated the program.
The only reason you could do that is because Gemini is a scale-up Mercury. You've had the Mercury background. So
Right.
you have some confidence that if you check out the system, that you can proceed immediately. If we're totally new, I don't think you would dare say you're going to do the man on the second flight.
Well, there is such a short.
26 months from the date we initiated the program.
The only reason you could do that is because Gemini is a scale-up Mercury. You've had the Mercury background. So
Right.
you have some confidence that if you check out the system, you can proceed immediately. If we're totally new, I don't think you would dare say you're going to do the man on the second flight.
Well, there is such a short time between now and the first Gemini launch that it is true that it's somewhat optimistic that you can make up that time. However, I think in the Apollo, the money spent is being spent to do things, and I feel that will pick up the time, or at least give you confidence in the schedule. We're money limited right now on things we should be doing.
Now, can I say just 2 other things that I think are important? We are creating, I think here, a better kind of partnership between government and industry than we've had in many of these big programs. We've learned a lot from the defense programs and the others. I think we're going to come out of this with a much better partnership arrangement, but I think industry has got to get more cost-conscious about these things, and we have this in a driving effort. I would worry about saying to industry, just get going, money is no object, because you can add not this $427 million, but you can add vast sums beyond it. We've got to make industry conscious of cost here. We have been along at these large increases and have fought tooth and toenail with these people. I've created a little group of 5 top executives, every one of whom have earned $100,000 a year, right around my own office. I've got them as roving people out, looking at these things to see whether their judgment as managers of large affairs is that what's going on is good. I'm personally going out. So Brainerd and Bob, Hugh is spending some time at this. We we've got a real job to do to make this thing come out without a scandal. Now, I think one of our greatest vulnerabilities in the next Congress lies in two directions. Mr. Truman always told me as budget director never to give him a political judgment, to give him the facts, he'd make the political judgment. I think as the agency head, I can talk a little bit of the political factor with you. The first one is that the aerospace industry has excess capacity. The Boeing company, Mr. Allen, came to me and said that whereas we are scheduling 3,900 men at work on the first stage of the Saturn at the Michoud plant, which is a part of this Apollo program, he was prepared to put 7,000 men on it right away for the earliest possible time if we really wanted to move that advanced Saturn as fast as it could be moved. Now, this is the kind of telescoping into the early years of tremendous cost that would not make our budget $6 billion to $6 billion too, but would make it 7 or 7.5. I think we'll get a better job with 4,000 Boeing people on that first stage than 7,000, you see. Now, this runs all the way through. I gave you the McDonald figures. As he scales out his engineers on the Phantom, he would sure like to put them on Gemini, because he's got a chance to sell that all around to the Air Force and others, make a great record earlier for himself, and he retains these engineers for any possibility that might come along, you see. Now, the second point I want to make to you, beyond this excess capacity in the aerospace industry, which our program just simply can't absorb. We aren't big enough to absorb that, as big as we are. The second point I want to make is that the success we've had in the Congress has not been because, as Jerry sometimes says to me, just wave space at Congress and they give you $1 billion. It's because we've really worked hard at understanding how to move forward with Congress. Now, in the case of the Senate committee, Senator Curry's had an absolute rule with his committee. He would not report out a bill until he got unanimity in the committee. If we put him on the line for a deficiency, then he is not in that position at all. He's got to get that deficiency through, and he's got to make whatever kind of arrangements, even without a unanimous vote. Up to now, we've had a unanimous vote in the Senate committee and in the House committee. And on a roll call vote in the House, a unanimous roll call vote for this vote. This makes it a bipartisan program. Now, second, in other words, the tactics that have been employed would have to change. Second, I think our greatest vulnerability is not a change of tactics, but an attack that will be made on us because of these increased costs. We're working as hard as we can to be in good position there, but there isn't any way to avoid the fact that having moved as fast as we have, I think we've made fewer mistakes than most programs have made, but we have made some. And some of the programs that we inherited, every major program we've got except Apollo and Gemini were funded and started some other place and transferred to us. In the case of the Centaur, we've got can I use the word lousy in the captain's room, Jerry? We've got really a sorry record in the government, and an even worse one with the Centaur. But we've moved to straighten it out. When Werner von Braun took the step of writing a letter to Congress saying that he thought this ought to be canceled, I jerked it out from under him in 3 days and put it up in Abe Silverstein in Cleveland. Now, this is the kind of thing we're having to do here to straighten out things that otherwise are going to cause us trouble. What I want to do with Centaur is get it in such good shape by about next February or March that when Congress says, look at this terrible record, we say, don't look at the record, look at what we're doing now. Now, we've got that kind of situation in these excess costs.
What's the matter with Centaur?
Well, there are lots of things that have caused us trouble. First, now that our own group at Huntsville, nor the contractor, recognized certain aerodynamic requirements which were known at the time. In other words, the contractor himself built a vehicle that wouldn't stand the pressure of the advanced speed.
Well, actually, there was a basic problem here. This is our first attempt to use a hydrogen, oxygen.
I'm coming to that.
And I think they underestimated how tough it was going to be by a factor of 3.
That's the second part. You see, every upper stage of all of our big vehicles is based on using liquid hydrogen as the fuel. You've got to store this, pump it, and burn it at minus 423 degrees.
What contribution is the Centaur going to make to what are you going to get out of Centaur?
Well, the first thing we're going to get out of it is a 50% reduction in the cost of our planetary shots. We can do the planetary shots with the Centaur for about $25 million, 15 of which is for the spacecraft and $10 million for the Centaur. If we use the Saturn with a changed upper stage, it costs us $50 million, $35 million for the Saturn. Now, this is where we're fighting for, but more than anything, maybe you ought to speak on this, we want to lift the problem of using liquid hydrogen as a fuel in this small vehicle without having to do it in the big vehicles, which are now beginning to come off the production line. Douglas has already delivered the first unit of the Saturn S4B stage, which is now on the way to Huntsville for test.
Now let me just getting back to this. What is your your view is we ought to spend this 440 million?
My view is if we constructively spent, it would accelerate the Apollo schedule, yes, sir. Let me say, I was very sorry. I ought to add, I'm very sorry about this. I had no disagreement with Mr. Webb. He said the policy. I think my job is to say how fast I think we can go for what dollars.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's fair to say one other thing, Mr. President, that after your visit, when you were saying how important this was, the speech you made, I think Brainerd and Warner Von Braun and Gil Ruth all felt, well, we've got to find out how fast we can move here. The President wants to move. So they went to the contractors and said, how fast can you move, boys, if money will not let it? Now, this sort of got cranked up into a feeling that this money was going to be made available. Now, the policy decision had already been made to ask for the supplemental. And I think to a certain extent then, the magazines like Time had picked this up and wanted to make a controversy.
As I understood, it wasn't, at least here, it isn't so much that we wanted to speed it up, it's the question of how much we're going to split. You don't like that word, but that's what we're talking about.
Well, now, no, sir, I don't think so. The reason I don't like the word is that those schedules were never approved by Dryden, Siemens, and me. They were not officially scheduled flights in the agency, but they were tentatively scheduled in order to ask the contractors how much they could do for Brainerd to really get moving. When he came into this program,
these dates, but Jimmy, are you saying that these dates were not ever set?
They were not officially set by me or Dryden or
What dates
Siemens.
were set?
We were waiting to determine what the budget director was going to give us on the 64 budget to definitely set our dates. Because this made a vast difference.
67, but you mean what part of 67 was never set?
Well, the 67 date has been set, and we're going to make it.
What part of 67 was never set, is that correct?
Well, we talked all the time of late 67 or early 68.
We never set a budget.
That's right.
So now, when we talk about 400 million, well, now then tell me what's happened here. You had a date in your mind which, unless you get the 400 million, you feel there's a good chance it will go back to the end of until about 6 months. And Mr. Webb says that there was never a date in 67.
What happened is this, I think. First off, we didn't have a definitized program. We hadn't even decided what size the boosters would be, for instance, at the very end of last year. So as soon as we could, we definitized all the elements of the program. But then still, until one decides the mission which you're going to go, you couldn't interleave these schedules. You couldn't decide really what kind of a program you're going to have and what kind of funding you're going to have. So once we assumed what the mission would be in June, going with this LOR, and I'm not here talking about one mission versus another, but a mission to justify schedules on. Put down all the detail, hundreds of schedules to interleave. We came with costs associated with those schedules, and these costs and dates came out to be this first schedule, which appeared to be to us a reasonable schedule on a class basis. Further than, just as Mr. Webb has said, the contractor estimates were low. Our estimates of what they would require were low. All that information was pouring in. We put the two together to go versus this time with these dollars that we had as estimates. It came out that we were short in fiscal 63. So we didn't know that before that.
So then we started talking to the budget director or thereabouts.
Yeah, August and September.
Mr. President, may I say one more thing that I think you should keep in mind? Practically every program of this sort that we've ever had has grown by a factor somewhere between 2 and 3 in cost from the beginning to end. The Mercury is what, about 2.5? About 3, I think 3. And I think you have to bear in mind that these program costs are still going to grow. I'm not sure that Jim or Raynard will agree with me.
Well, no, this is
even on the schedule, you're going to have to face, on any schedule you pick, you're going to have to face increasing costs year after year, in my opinion. And if we find some trouble, which we're undoubtedly going to find, the schedule will stretch and go up in cost. And depending on the level you select now, the rate at which the costs are going to accelerate on in future years will be determined.
Mr. President, I
You've
would
got to
like
bear that in mind. The $500 may be small compared to the add-ons in future years.
I think we've learned a great deal from Mercury. As part of the so-called increase in Mercury, it was a matter of definition of what Mercury included. We started with an estimate of what the McDonald contract would be to build a capsule. But Mercury involved not only the capsule, it involved the worldwide tracking network, it involved ground support equipment for handling the capsule on the ground, checkout equipment. these numbers is just fantastic compared with the corresponding figures on Mercury.
We know a great deal more.
I think this is a much sounder basis. I would be surprised if the cost went up by 3.
I'd be surprised if it went up more than 50%. That's still a lot of money.
Well, let me make a statement on that I have made to the budget director. You remember when I first talked to you about this program, and the first statement I made to Congress was that the lunar program would cost between $20 and $40 billion. Now, I'm able to say right now it's going to be under the $20 billion, under the lower limit that we use. The question is how rapidly you spend the money and how efficiently you manage this so as to get the most possible for the money. This can be speeded up at the expense of certain things which I've outlined in the letter to you. It can be slowed up if a year from now we find that we don't have to proceed at this basis. But this is a good, sound, solid program that will keep all of the governmental agencies and the contractors and the rest moving ahead. But we're prepared to move if you really want to put it on a crash basis.
Do you put this program, I think this program is the top priority program of the agency?
No, sir, I do not. I think it is one of the top priority programs, but I think it's very important to recognize here that as you have found what you could do with the rocket, as you found how you could get out beyond the Earth's atmosphere and into space and make measurements, several scientific disciplines that are very powerful have begun to converge on this area.
Yeah, I think it is the top priority. I think we ought to have that very clear. Some of these other programs can slip 6 months or 9 months and nothing particularly is going to happen. But this is important for political reasons, international political reasons, and this is, whether we like it or not, an intensive race. If we get second to the moon, it's nice, but it's like being second anytime. So that and if we're second by 6 months, because we didn't give it the kind of priority, then of course that'd be very serious. So I think we have to take the view this is the top priority of it.
But the environment of space is where you're going to operate the Apollo and where you're going to do the landing.
But I know all these other things and the satellite, the communications and weather and all. They're desirable, but they can wait.
Oh no, I'm not putting those. I'm talking now about the scientific program to understand the space environment within which you've got to fly Apollo and make a landing on the moon.
That's saying, well, no, wait a minute. Is that saying that the lunar program, the land, the man, and the moon, is the top priority of the agency? Is it?
And the science that goes with it.
Well, yes, if you add that.
No, but I mean, the science only.
That is necessary.
The science, going to the moon is the top priority project. Now, there are a lot of related scientific information and developments that will come from that, which are important. But the whole thrust of the agency, in my opinion, is the lunar program. The rest of it can wait 6 and 9 months.
Well, the trouble, Jerry, hold up his hand. Let me say one thing, and then maybe you want to reinforce it. Yeah. The thing that troubles me here about making such a flat statement as that is, number one, there are real unknowns as to whether man can live under the weightless condition and you'll ever make the lunar landing. This is one kind of political vulnerability I'd like to avoid such a flat commitment to. If you say you failed on your number one priority, this is something to think about. Now, the second point is that as we can go out and make measurements in space by being physically able to get there, the scientific work feeds the technology and the engineers begin to make better spacecraft. That gives you better instruments and better chance to go out and learn more. Now, right now, all through our universities, some of the brilliant, able scientists are recognizing this and beginning to get into this area, and you are generating here on a national basis an intellectual effort of the highest order of magnitude that I've seen develop in this country in the years I've been fooling around with national policy. Now, to them, there is a real question. The people that are going to furnish the brain work, the real brain work that on which the future space power of this nation for 2,500 years is going to be based, have got some doubts about it, and the other part doesn't, as to whether the actual landing on the moon is what you call the highest priority.
They think the highest priority.
They think the highest priority is to understand the environment and the areas of the laws of nature that operate out there as they apply backwards into space. You could say it this way, I think. And Jerry ought to talk on this rather than me, but the scientists in the nuclear field have penetrated right into the most minute areas, the nucleus and the subparticles of the nucleus. Now here out in the universe, you've got the same general kind of a structure, but you can do it on a massive universal scale.
I agree that we're interested in, but we can wait 6 months and all that.
But you have to use that information
But they're saying, yeah, but only when that information directly applies to the program. Jim, I think we got to have that.
programs that aren't associated with the lunar program can have any priority we please to give them.
That's good. I answer that, Jerry. Yes, I do.
That's consistent with what the President was saying.
Yeah. Could I just say that I agree with what you say, Jerry, that we must gather a wide variety of scientific data in order to carry out the lunar mission. For example, we must know what conditions we'll find on the lunar surface. That's the reason that we are proceeding with Centaur in order to get the Surveyor unmanned spacecraft to the moon in time that it could affect the design of the Apollo.
Yeah, the other thing is, I would certainly not favor spending $6 or $7 billion to find out about space, no matter how, on the schedule we're doing. I'd spell it out over a 5 or 10 year period. If we could spend it on, why are we spending $7 million in getting fresh water from salt water when we're spending $7 billion to find out about space? So obviously you wouldn't put it on that priority, except for the defense implications. And the second point is the fact that the Soviet Union has made this a test of the system. So that's why we're doing it. So I think we've got to take the view that this is the key program, and the rest of it, we can find out about it, but there's a lot of things we want to find out about.
But you see,
Cancer and everything else.
when you talk about this, it's very hard to draw a line between what
I
permitted
think
Russia.
everything that we do ought to really be tied into getting onto the moon and ahead of the Russians.
Why can't it be tied to preeminence in space, which are
Because
your
you
own
can't,
words?
because by God, we've been telling everybody we're preeminent in space. For 5 years, nobody believes us because they have the booster and the satellite. We know all about the number of satellites we put out, the 2 or 3 times the number of the Soviet Union. We're ahead scientifically. It's like that instrument you've got at Stanford, which is costing us $125 million, and everybody tells me that we're the number 1 in the world. And what is it? I can't even think of it. Accelerator. That's wonderful, but nobody knows anything about it.
Well, let me say it slightly different. The advanced Saturn is 85 times as powerful as the Atlas. Now, we are building a tremendous giant rocket with an index number of 85 if you give the Atlas 1. Now, the Russians have had a booster that would lift 14,000 pounds into orbit. They've been very efficient and capable in it. The kind of things I'm talking about that give you preeminence in space are what permit you to make either that Russian booster or the advanced Saturn better than any other. A range of progress.
We're not really talking about anything so much different. The only thing I did, we're not going to sell the $400 million this morning. I want to take a look and talk to Dave Bell, but I do think we ought to get it, really clear that the policy ought to be that this is the top priority program of the agency, and one of the two, except for defense, the top priority of the United States government. I think that's the position we ought to take. Now, this may not change anything about that schedule, but at least we ought to be clear. Otherwise, we shouldn't be spending this kind of money because I'm not that interested in space. I think it's good. I think we ought to know about it. We're ready to spend reasonable amounts of money, but we're talking about these fantastic expenditures which wreck our budget and all these other domestic programs. And the only justification for it, in my opinion, to do it this time how fast it is because we hope to beat them and demonstrate that starting behind it, we did by a couple of years. By God, we passed them. I think it's been a hell of a run for us.
I'd like to have more time to talk about that because there's a wide public sentiment coming along in this country for preeminence in space.
You can't prove your preeminence unless this is the way to prove your
If you've got an advanced Saturn rocket.
So we do have to talk about this, and I think that if this affects in any way our sort of allocation of resource and all the rest, then it is a substantive question, and I think we've got to get it clarified. I'd like to have you tell me in a brief, you'd write me a letter, your views, because I'm not sure that we're far apart. But I think all these programs which contribute to the lunar program come within, contribute significantly, or really in a sense, let's put it this way, are essential. Put it that way, are essential to the success of the lunar program are justified. Those that are not essential to the lunar program but help contribute over a broad spectrum to our preeminence in space are secondary. That's my view.
All right, but let me say this. If I go out and say that this is the number 1 priority and everything else must give way to it, I'm going to lose an important element of support for your program and for your administration by a large number of people. Well, particularly the brainy people in industry and in the universities who are looking at a solid base.
Yeah, but we're not going to pay the kind of money that to get that position that we're spending it. I say the only reason you can justify spending this is tremendous. I spend $5 or $6 billion a year when I return home, and all these other programs were starving to death.
Because in Berlin you spent $6 billion a year adding to your military budget because the Russians acted the way they did. And I have some feeling that you might not have been as successful on Cuba if we hadn't flown John Glenn and demonstrated we had a real overall technical capability here.
I agree. That's why we want to put this program. That's the dramatic evidence You hadn't cloned Johnny Lennon could be preeminent in space.
Well, I just put him on the moon.
No,
I showed him the ability.
For the time, you did what we needed to do
I
for
think
the
you're right,
time.
Mr. President, they're not as far apart as this sounds, because the budget that they have submitted, 464.
But I know we're not far apart, I'm sure, and the budget, we may not be apart at all, but I do think at least we're in word somewhat apart. I'd like to get those words just to say.
It's perfectly fine, I think.
How about you writing me and telling me how you, how you assign these priorities, then perhaps I could write to you and give you my.
All right. But I do think it certainly doesn't hurt us to have this Time article that shows we are really going ahead with the program. I don't think it hurts the agency. I don't think it hurts at all for you, as you have done several times, to say that's number one. But I also think as administrator, I've got to take a little broader view of all the publics here, including those that vote for these appropriations in the Congress. I mean, I don't think we've got to be using the same words.
Could I state my view of this? I believe that we proceeded on Mercury, and we're now proceeding on Gemini and Apollo as the number one program in NASA. It has a DX priority. Nothing else has a DX priority.
And recommended 4.7 billion funds for it for 1962.
At the same time, when you say something has a top priority, in my view, it doesn't mean that you completely emasculate everything else if you run into budget problems on the Apollo and the Gemini, because you could very rapidly completely eliminate your meteorological program, your communication program, and so on. If you took that to too great an extreme.
And the advanced technology on which military power is going to be based.
Mr. President, this is the issue. Suppose Holmes has an overrun of $500 million to reprogram $500 million for the rest of the space program would just throw the whole thing all away. And I think this is the worry. It's in Jim's mind about top priority.
I think in the letter you ought to mention how the other programs which the agency is carrying out tie into the lunar program, what their connection is, and how essential they are to the target date we're talking about, and if they are only indirectly related, what their contribution is to the general business of terms of space. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you. Can we subject the minute here now and see where we stand? David, is there anything we can say about where we stand now? You see, one of the things that causes some of this difficulty is that because of the delay in the lunar orbit and the necessity of making the budget decisions, we have not wanted at the top to be too firm about schedule. Rather, it had to be firm and drive people to say, get on, we got to beat these dates, you see. Now, this is the fact that Congress was so late to get passed in the budget. All of these things have sort of created the kind of situation. What are the next moves? Of course, I like this letter, but that won't settle it. I mean, this will be a running argument for the next 20 years in this country about what their priority is space.
The action questions that are before the President revolve around the 1964 budget, including the question of 63 supplemental, which we can
Right. I thought your letter was a splendid presentation.
Now, this has to be settled in the next 2 weeks. You know, the whole 64 budget is in the final stages of settlement in the next couple of weeks. It's all coming into focus, so that this isn't just something that's going to lag on.
Right. Then we don't need to do anything with respect to our contractors on centers for that period of time beyond what we've done, do we?
No. All right. Now, the one element that occurred to me this morning during this conversation is we aren't as well buttressed on as we need to be. It's a complicated element. What would be required if we did decide starting now to go on a deficiency basis? Well, it's a legal question. We'll have to get our lawyers, you might get your lawyers to check the same thing.
I'd like to vote against that.
Well, I know you vote against it, but this is the
President, go ahead, do it.
Can I do it? We got to have an answer. You know,
Yeah.
you can or no, you can't.
All right.
Here's what you'd have to do.
All right, we'll get Johnny Johnson right to work on it.
And the political aspect, you know, who would you call in, but what agreement would you try to get out of? What's about your current problem? So that if you decide you want to do this, we are prepared to say how we're going to take it.
You see, you've got these problems. Congress isn't organized yet.
Well, not forced.
Well, I know, I know that, but I want to say something that's important. We don't know who'll be the chairman of the Space Committee the next time. Who you make the arrangement with? Chapman was chairman of the Public Works Committee, and Kerr is in line to become chairman there. And
Can't be chairman of both.
cannot be chairman of both.
Space committee, a permanent committee in the Senate?
Yes. see, the question here about who you make a deal with.
Number two.
Well, yeah, you got an lawyer. You got Dick Russell. You got Clinton Anderson. Assuming they stay where they are, Symington would be number two. But again, we hear noises that Clinton Anderson may decide to assert his seniority and take this and give up the atomic stuff. Now, so
Well, he's head of Interior. He'd have to give up
he'd have to give up the interior.
the atomic thing. I don't think.
No.
Does it?
I don't know. But in any way, Anderson has up to now been disqualified for space because they had another committee.
Right.
And he is now
Interior.
he is now thinking of outer stuff. I'm not in the interior. I don't know about that. But seriously, I don't know. You'd have a real problem with who you make a deal with.
Okay.
Why is that?
That's an important point.
Yeah.
I know about
Yeah.
these considerations, it seems to me.
Now, the second-
We're quite prepared on
The
this.
second thing that's very
Considerations are quite clear.
the second thing that's very important to recognize is that you've got 6 vacancies on the House Space Committee as a result of this election and certain changes that have been made. Teague moves up now to be the number 1 Democrat right behind the chairman. He's chairman of Manned Space Flight. He would want to start hearings last week on the supplemental. But now the problem here is the Congress is not going to follow Teague.
Not only it would be Albert Thomas rather than Teague.
Well, you've got George Miller, you've got Carl Albert of Oklahoma, you've got McCormick to deal with here. McCormick was on the Space Committee, takes a great pride in this.
As a supplemental appropriation, we would take both authorization and
Well,
appropriation.
you're not going to, the Appropriations Committee would
Yeah.
Oh, sure, sure. Now, so there's a real question. Teague would immediately say, sure, I'll get this through. I'll get through in 60 days. But it wouldn't mean a thing. Now, all of this has to be thought through.
Followed by the appropriation.
Well, I can just tell you now, he ain't got the votes. He can get you 5 or 7 votes.
You mean you're not sure he could get it through in 60 days?
I'm not, listen, unless you had more than him, you ain't going to get it through at all. That's what I mean.
Yeah.
I mean, his judgment is not the one that's going to determine the issue in the House.
Right.
Now, you've got a reorganization of this committee. You've got at least 2 or 3 of the subcommittees to change chairman in the House. Now, all of this is you've lost the second man behind Albert Thomas on this subcommittee deals with appropriation, Yates of Illinois. Now, what I'm trying to say is that the complexion of the Congress, as it gets organized, will have a bearing on this. And I don't think you can completely forecast that. Now, I want to make one thing very clear to you as budget director that as of this time, I have no intention whatever of letting Brainerd get in the frame of mind that we're going to make up any overrun he has over the other programs. So I'm telling the budget director right now that the allocations of money to you are firm and fixed, and there's been no overrun to improve the other programs.
You are aware, quite independent of Brainerd, we have started thinking about what this kind of an attitude would mean to the 64 budget.
Sure.
We talked about it over in your office.
Right.
Today.
Right. Well, I don't want him to be confused by anything the President may have said here today.
I'll work for you, Jim.
I'll tell you what I think we need. You tell me what you're going to do.
That's right. But you see, I'm weighing a whole lot of things. I can see the political implications, and I can see his desire to say this is the number 1 objective. But I see more the troubles he'll be in a year or 2 from now, maybe than he does, you see.
I think it is important, however, Jim, to make clear to the President that you have, in fact, reprogrammed very substantial sums of money in the 64 budget already.
Yeah.
Already within the landing program.
Oh, we have. We could take the NOVA money and put it in.
Not already. Not all, but a good deal of it. I mean, what we have is done. And also, if I remember correctly, items from other parts of the budget, and to put them into the MLL program already.
We'll look at that. But basically, Dave, the thing from a standpoint of making this program succeed, and
We lost 120 million. We lost 120 million.
All of that cut
In the Congress, we had 100.
yeah,
All right, well, that's the same thing.
yeah, right.
Came out of the other program.
Right. But now let me make one thing very, very clear. The real success of this program and what it does for this administration in terms of prestige and for the country in terms of a position of preeminence is going to depend not so much on these target dates, but how this program is run. These birds are going to fly or not fly, not by what you put on the schedule or the amount of money put in, but the way this thing is run. As a matter of over the next year or 2, we have got to validate the capacity of the government to run a program like this in partnership with industry. This has not yet been proved. And the attitude, the the philosophy within which you go of a tight, hard driving race here, watching the dollars, is going to be terribly important, in my opinion, in where you come out. And the easiest thing you could do is have this nice image we've got now. You roll it away by a bunch of foolish things.
I don't think that the president or any of us has any illusions about that. I think
Well,
we all think it's being run very well.
Well, it's not being run too well. I'm saying to you, we are more vulnerable to this kind of an attack.
And you're improving it every day.
We're running fast and trying to stay ahead.
Like we've been discussing this morning, are legitimate questions that do need to be faced, and they're to be met rationally, and we make the best decision feasible.
Absolutely.
But this is none of this should be interpreted as a challenge to the basic management of the effort.
But the decisions, the way we present this, you see, you go out and say this is the number one priority, and I tell you, between North America and Werner and Allen will be in, say, see, I told you you could have 7,000 people, I want to put them on. You say, no, sir, Mr. Allen, we're going to stick to the 3,900. He immediately feeds up to the press. Well, it isn't really the number one priority. So this is a vulnerability, too. All I'm trying to say is that we are running about 3 steps ahead of the pack of hounds. And we have got some real vulnerabilities to validate the capacity to do this thing, which is almost beyond the possible anyhow.
Sure. Well, I think you have a very fine opportunity now in raising the request.
I agree.
To put before the president how the real attitude.
Sir, I'm on vacation. That's a challenge to my position.
Not only strategic capacity, to some extent the president is talking about what we really are doing. To some extent he's talking about what we should say about it.
That's right.
And it's just as well to distinguish.
Absolutely right.
Response.
Absolutely right. But
That date, for instance, is something that all of us, for obvious and good reasons, have never said anything about publicly or as a commitment.
But I think that to let Time Magazine, any of these publications start to say that to be worried by the fact they say that you don't give the lunar landing a number one priority above everything else is something that he ought to avoid, because it doesn't have to be put to the country that way. I mean, I've been around all these top people now. I've been traveling on the road, and I've been with the real big dogs, and I know the deal about what they say. Time ain't running the minds of the best people in the country.
That's perfectly clear, but our problem is we all work for the president as far as he's concerned, as he very clearly expressed this morning. Whatever we say about it, to say the manned lunar landing program is the number one priority program as far as he's concerned.
Well, I want him to be getting
the science that is associated with it is necessary to make the manned lunar landing possible.
The way you presented your budget information was summed up to $4.6 billion.
We rearrange it so well, but it's not
worked
out.
out.
That sure is a high priority. Three points of our effort is going into that.
That's what he's talking about.
Yeah, well, we agree. I think so. Dave, one final thing. You see, when we started out on this program, there was a pretty strong little group, including several top people in NASA and outlining operations, that wanted us to abandon all the rest of the stuff. That said, you can't do it all. Now, I fought tooth and toenail here to avoid this implication that we are just a one-purpose basis to go into the moon. And I hate to see the president. I'd like to get
I don't think you understand what he was saying fully. Because he's not saying abandonment of this stuff. He is saying keep right on doing it. It's very important, but it doesn't have the same urgency as the momentum. That's what he means by number one priority.
But it does, though. In terms of the power of this nation, it has.
That's what
It may have more.
That's what he wants you to argue to him.
Yeah. That's what I want to have the chance.
But the point is, by saying the lunar landing program should be the number one priority program, he is not saying throw the rest of it away.
Yeah, right.
You see, so don't exaggerate in your mind what the thrust of his argument.
Right.
He's saying there's a difference in urgency in him. There are those parts of your program that relate to landing on the moon and those that don't.
Yeah.
And he would let the others slip a little where he wouldn't let the NLL program slip. That's all. I don't think he was saying that you would drop out the rest of the program.
I don't think he means to say either the top priority means Werner Brown, Bob Gilroy, Maynard can get every dollar they ask for.
That's a different question.
But these big boosters can absorb dollars. Boy, so fast, and
They are.
if these boys think the money's around, they'll have it.